The world is very ancient, and human origins are mysterious and obscure. We try to decipher our past based upon the multiple layers of civilizations whose ruins lay strewn across the planet like pieces of an archaic jigsaw puzzle. Some of these old civilizations are still buried beneath the deserts, mountains, and oceans, awaiting a time when they will yield their secrets through human discovery or natural cataclysms that will strip away and reveal their hidden locations. In the unique perspective on history that will be explored in this series, the case for a vaster chronological perspective of history will be investigated, based upon ancient sources hitherto unrecognized by the majority. With limited tools at the disposal of modern sciences, history has been abbreviated into a narrow band that does not sufficiently explain the vast time periods needed to evolve the human form and human consciousness. Deep in our racial memory or collective consciousness lurks the legends and myths of lands and continents that once existed, such as Lemuria and Atlantis. Fabulous stories abound of advanced cultures with their arts and technologies that have risen to great heights and then fallen back into the dust of history once again. Understanding these rhythms and cycles of time help us to understand that our modern civilizations are not the first to have emerged, nor are they necessarily more advanced than previous ones that have come and gone. This new approach to history challenges the way we think about the past based upon our cultural, religious, and educational conditioning. These structures have helped humanity thus far understand the world, but which in today's rapid acceleration of planetary consciousness are very limited and starting to break down. They are overdue for transformation into a broader, more inclusive vision. The possibility of discovering and understanding the origin of the human soul and its divine pedigree is imminent in our time. We stand before a doorway leading to planetary illumination upon the greatest mysteries of life, the hidden history of humanity.
The intention of the Hidden History of Humanity project is to re-establish the correct chronology and timelines for human history. That's part of it. The other part of it is that humanity is disempowered in not knowing its true origins or indeed the chronology. So to establish the correct chronology and the understanding of the root races, how humanity came into being, and how the evolution of consciousness proceeded from there, is going to empower humanity with knowing the truth. Humanity is having the truth hidden from it at this point in time, but it is actually emerging. We have light emerging, we have truth emerging, and this is happening exoterically in parallel with this esoteric emergence of the ageless wisdom teachings.
Part of the intention of the Hidden History of Humanity series is to present a chronological sequence of history that demonstrates the evolution of consciousness by humanity, the mystery of when the human soul came into existence and its purpose. This first series will establish a broad structure of understanding for the future series that will elaborate further. Evolution will be traced from before the human race appeared through the stages of the Lemurian, Atlantean, and current root races. It will finish with contemporary humanity that is now transitioning into the sixth root race. It will discuss the evolution that will unfold in the future, always in the context of what has transpired. It has been said that unless we understand our history, then we are condemned to repeat the mistakes of the past. On the scientific side, several key areas will be explored in this history of the root races, such as geology, geography, astronomy, archaeology, and anthropology. From the religious angle, some of the most ancient works will be referenced: the Hindu, Jewish, Persian, Islamic, Buddhist, Gnostic, Celtic, and Christian traditions. Investigating the hidden history of the world means that we must return to discover the birth of the solar system, of which our Earth is but one participant. Stupendous questions will be explored as to how this solar system came into existence, with its subsequent planetary schemes, chains, rounds, and globes.
Modern science insists upon the doctrine of evolution. So does human reason and the secret doctrine. The idea is corroborated in ancient legends and myths, and even by the Bible when it is interpreted esoterically. We see a bud slowly developing from a seed and a flower from the bud. But what of the seed with its predetermined program of physical transformation? What about the invisible, therefore spiritual forces which gradually develop its form, color, and perfume? The word evolution speaks for itself. The origin of the present human race pre-existed in its parent race as a seed, in which lies hidden the flower of the next race. The ancestors of the present elephant and lizard may have been the mammoth and the plesiosaurus. Why should not the originators of our human race have been the giants described in the ancient Hindu Vedas or the Book of Genesis? There are several keys to the mysteries, past, present, and future, of the 7 great root races and the 7 great cycles. Every symbol and allegory is said to have 7 keys, the 7 keys to the entrance of the door of the mysteries, and that each key must be turned 7 times.
Well, the ageless wisdom has been called the perennial philosophy as well. It's ageless because it's timeless. It's the same verities and truths that exist throughout all time. And the ageless wisdom teachings come to us in many forms, through mythology, through various amanuenses who have been transmitters of the teachings from the hierarchy of the masters of wisdom, through the ancient Vedas, of course, through the spiritual traditions that exist universally. These various frequencies of the ageless wisdom teachings are available for people to plug into at whatever level of understanding that they have reached thus far in their soul evolution.
There are several other keys to this study that include psychology, physiology, metaphysics, astrology, and sacred geometry. The synthesis of even a few of these keys will shed light upon the evolution of consciousness in the human kingdom, the purpose of the human soul, and its existence. For many, to be told that the age of thinking humanity is around 18.6 million years may invite some disbelief or even derision and ridicule. Such is the state of Maya, or illusion, in which we all live, conditioned by thousands of years of wrong thinking, religious propaganda, ignorance, and lack of spiritual education. The somewhat overdeveloped concrete mind of humanity in this fifth root race is a particular liability, in that it does not recognize the subtle so easily, only that which is tangible. History, with its many evidences of past civilizations, is in a tangled and confused state. Humanity's approach to our past has imposed upon itself the limitations of dogmatic science and theology, ignoring the ancient traditions that hold the keys to many of these riddles. We live in a time of the approaching astronomical cycle of Aquarius, where the ancient mysteries will be reinstated after thousands of years of being hidden from the eyes and ears of the profane. Humanity stands at the doorway of initiation into the mysteries of history and higher consciousness. There are many isolated strands in history that can be drawn together. There are many facts that can be collated, especially those corroborated by direct as well as inferential evidence found in ancient literature and history. This is one of the fundamental purposes of the Hidden History of Humanity Project's books and video series. Much of this ancient literature is contained within the Hindu Puranas, the Upanishads, the Rig Veda, the Mahabharata, and the Ramayana. This is logical, for the Hindu tradition is the oldest of our current races. In the Puranas, the meaning and chronological order is very clear. We can count generations of the Manus and their series of incarnations as heroes in the old stories. The Manu sets the tone and type of any given race in terms of its evolutionary goal. The ancient book of Manu gives a complete narrative of creation with a chronology of the divine ages of the heroes through to the appearance of man on earth. Likewise, in the Egyptian tradition, all the lists of past kings were recorded carefully, documenting races and sub-races reaching right back into ancient Atlantean and Lemurian history. The most recent references to our current fifth root race also come to us from the Old Testament, where the history of all the human races is contained in the first 6 chapters of Genesis. Much of this will also be explored in this series. Genesis, from chapter 4, verse 16, through to the end of the 5th chapter, gives purely historical facts taken word for word from the secret book of Numbers in the great Oriental Kabbalah. The patriarchs of the Old Testament, such as Adam, Cain, and Seth, are the same as the Hindu Manus who set the tone, impulse, and purpose for each evolution in the root races, sub-races, and branch races.
The Book of Revelation, chapter 17, verse 10, has preserved a tradition that speaks of the 7 races, where there are 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come.
This passage refers to the 5 root races that have elapsed, including our 5th root race that is almost finished. That which is not yet come refers to the coming 6th and 7th root races. Interpretation of the Bible, both in the New and Old Testaments and based upon the secret sciences, has yet to be fully exposed with its many allusions to the septenary constitution of earth and man, to the 7 major cycles or rounds and the 7 root races. The ancient Greek tradition was also a repository of the ageless wisdom, encoded throughout its wonderful and deeply evocative mythology. The Greek allegories give to Atlas 7 daughters, representing the 7 subraces of Atlantis. These daughters are the mothers of famous heroes, the founders of many nations and cities. Astronomically, Atlas's daughters are the 7 Pleiades. The 2 are connected with nations whose destinies are shaped by the past events of their early lives according to universal karmic law. In the Greek tradition, the root races are divided into the golden, silver, bronze, and iron ages, and have an identical correspondence to the Hindu yuga cycles, such as the Kali and Satya yugas. The 3 one-eyed giants of Greek mythology are a reference to the last subraces of the Lemurian root race. Hence, we can see the sources of the ageless wisdom or perennial philosophy that lay hid in universal mythology and religion. The same or similar stories are told in all cultures, indicating the consistency and veracity of these ancient stories within the collective consciousness of humanity.
Mythology is one of the great keys to studying the mysteries, because the mysteries are encoded in mythology, in Greek mythology, in Scandinavian mythology, in mythology of all traditions. Like music, mythology is one of the great universal languages that we can understand and which anyone can tap into quite easily for understanding the archetypes of the gods that are described in the various stories. In mythology, we have the stories of all the planets and their relationship to one another, personified by the planetary gods. We have Zeus, Jupiter, and Mars, and Venus, and Mercury. They all have these various stories which describe their interrelationship with one another. The ancient wisdom teachings are encoded in all mythologies, East and West.
The secret history of the world is revealed in many traditions, the duration of which far surpasses the minuscule figures used in modern times. In the denial or ignorance of its true origins lies the source of disempowerment for humanity, in not knowing its divine source, the nature of the human soul, and the very lengthy evolution of human consciousness. Who today really reflects about our true history and ancient past, preoccupied as we are in a busy world trying to survive? Most people accept the culturally conditioned views of the Western Bible and/or modern science, both of which do not, on the average, offer more than 5,000 to 10,000 years for the origin of human civilization. However, this is changing in some fields of science, going back into hundreds of thousands or millions of years in some cases. In our current fifth root race, resonant with 5, the number of mind, there has been achieved a perfection, refinement, and quintessential expression of the concrete mind. Although this has brought many benefits in science and technology, its shadow expression via the critical mind tends to be separative at the expense of the love principle. The lower mind only functions through the 5 tangible senses. In the coming Aquarian cycle, the secret sciences will blend more fully with mainstream science. The 6th sense, or intuition, is in its early stage of development in this imminent 6th root race, hence perception of the more subtle aspects of human evolution, such as the aura, chakras, and the invisible forces behind nature, is still limited, unrecognized and unrealized by the majority. With regard to our history, there are many crystallized belief systems that influence current world thinking. They are compounded by an unquestioning and undiscriminating acceptance under the authority of modern science or religion. Likewise, history tends to stay in a straitjacket of conformist, consensus thinking that excludes any other viewpoints. This is changing, however, almost imperceptibly, as inquirers from many disciplines are questioning existing viewpoints of the status quo. They are uncovering more and more evidence that will continually transform current thinking. This Hidden History of Humanity project series is part of this incoming wave, expanding our worldview, pushing us ever forward in our evolution. There is one boundless, immutable principle, one absolute reality which antecedes all manifested conditioned being. It is beyond the range and reach of any human thought or expression. The manifested universe is contained within this absolute reality and is a conditioned symbol of it. Our planet and the whole cosmic scheme, with its suns, constellations, galaxies, and attendant planets, are part of one great cosmic plan whereby ever-increasing expansion of consciousness occurs. The Buddha said, "Veil after veil will fall, but veil after veil remains." The cosmos is ever expanding. Speculation on the intelligences and hierarchical orders of worlds is evident in many traditions. One can only ponder on the rich diversity of life within this living cosmos. All of these factors inform us that we cannot possibly be the only form of creative intelligence in this vast panorama of worlds. And humanity is coming to this gradual realization and imminent revelation in fact. The Earth incarnates over many vast cycles called rounds or manvantaras in the Hindu parlance. These cycles pour through the various so-called globes, chains, and schemes of Earth evolution.
The rounds are enormous periods of time, and there are 7 rounds that correspond to each planetary incarnation or globe of the so-called planetary logos. And we are currently in the 4th round of 7 rounds at the moment. And this has brought about an elapsed time of around about 1.93 billion years. We are halfway through this globe period. And these rounds are broken up into 2 other lesser cycles of 317 million years each, and these are called manvantaras. Manvantara, though, can be a generic name applied to any cycle. It literally means between 2 manus, and the manu is the being who sets the archetype for any particular race. So these 7 rounds are opportunities for the incarnating monads of the planet to gain experience by incarnating upon these streams of energy, which we call rounds, and subsequently find their incarnation into the various root races, sub-races, and branch races.
In this diagram of the Earth scheme are 7 large circles called chains. Within each of these large circles are 7 smaller circles called globes. The planets are called schemes because behind the visible outer planet are a series of worlds in more subtle matter called globes and chains. A planetary scheme holds within it the microcosm of the entire solar system. Our planetary logos, which is the ensouling entity of our physical Earth, undergoes many incarnations, which are called globe periods. There are 7 globes that are contained in a chain of globes. These 7 chains in a scheme make a total of 7 times 7 equal 49 globes. They represent past and future incarnations of the life we call a planetary logos, or God, upon our planet. Note that the current incarnation of the Earth is chain number 4, the central chain of the 7 chains. The 3rd chain is also called the moon chain, a previous incarnation of the Earth, for which our moon today is a remnant and reminder.
So the rounds and globes and chains refer to the greater picture of evolution. So if we're considering the whole solar system as an incarnation of the great life that emanates from Sirius, then we can get into a little bit more detail within the solar system. Every planet in the solar system is regarded as a planetary scheme, and within that scheme exists the globes and the chains of each particular planetary scheme, which is a microcosm of the entire solar system. So various globes and chains within the Earth scheme are named the Neptune chain or the Venus globe and so forth. And of course, all these planetary schemes within the solar system are connected to one another.
In time and space today, our Earth scheme is currently in the 4th globe of the 4th chain, about halfway through its evolution. It is now in the 25th globe, or incarnation of a total of 49 globes in the Earth scheme. A globe period lasts for 4.32 billion years.
The solar system as a whole is said to be at the middle point of its evolution, but on a much larger scale of some 155 trillion years. The yuga cycles have been described as symbolic by many modern scholars, but they are also literal in terms of time measurement. These are stupendous time scales, yet if one seriously studies and reflects upon the ancient Hindu yugas, it will be found that they have an innate beauty and truth that transcends our modern measurements of time.
The law of periodicity is basically the science of cycles. So periodically, these cycles recur over periods of time, they repeat, but they repeat on different turns of the evolutionary spiral. So we have cycles of the rays, we have cycles of the planets, and we of course have cycles of the zodiac. We have the precession cycle of the zodiac every 25,920 years. So we have many, many wheels within wheels to study in the science of cycles, and it can get very confusing. The yuga cycles of the Hindu tradition are based upon the precession cycle of the sun going through the zodiac. So we have a 2,160 years cycle of the sun precessing through Aquarius, through Pisces, and so forth. And if we multiply the 2,160 years cycle by 2, we get 4,320, which Blavatsky tells us is a magical cipher that we can use to calculate some of these cycles called the yugas.
Here is a simple representation of the proportion of the 4 yugas that comprise a Maha Yuga, or Great Wheel. The lesser yugas, or wheels, are the wheels within wheels. The yugas above describe the 4 yugas of this current 5th root race that started almost 4 million years ago, starting with the Satya Yuga and moving clockwise through the lesser yugas to finish at the Kali Yuga that started around 3000 BC.
Humanity has required eons for physical and mental development to evolve into its relatively sophisticated modern state. What do you think? Have you ever wondered just how long it has taken human evolution to unfold? Have you accepted what you were told at school or believed what adamant biblical scholars have declared? Or have you gone along with modern science's authority? How can we consider a longer time frame for history which ultimately conceals the greatest puzzles of existence and the mystery of the human soul? When the traditions of the most ancient cultures are consulted, we find, for instance, that the Hindu Tamil calendar, known as the Tirukanda Panchanga, gives the beginning of our strictly human evolution in this cycle at around 18.6 million years. These cycles also go back into trillions of years, and the Mayans have documented them in the billions. Are these figures fanciful, symbolic, or factual and literal? Although there are paradoxes about certain timescales between ancient sources and modern science, there is agreement about some of the really big cycles. For instance, noted scientist, the late Carl Sagan, said,
"The Hindu religion is the only one of the world's great faiths dedicated to the idea that the cosmos itself undergoes an immense, indeed an infinite, number of deaths and rebirths. It is the only religion in which time scales correspond to those of modern scientific cosmology. Its cycles run from our ordinary day and night to a day and night of Brahma, 8.64 billion years long, longer than the age of the Earth or the Sun. Physicist Fritjof Capra, in his best-selling book, wrote, "This idea of a periodically expanding and contracting universe, which involves a scale of time and space of vast proportions, has risen not only in modern cosmology, but also in ancient Indian mythology. Experiencing the universe as an organic and rhythmically moving cosmos, the Hindus were able to develop evolutionary cosmologies which come very close to our modern scientific models."
Revitalizing the truths of this existing paradigm of the science of cycles is another purpose of the Hidden History of Humanity project. It is an inherent part of the ancient wisdom of several cultures, part of our racial memory that we can all intuitively tap into, recognize, and understand. The key is to experiment with these laws by not dismissing them out of hand. Inquirers in their specific disciplines may find a great expansion of understanding through the application of the law of cycles. All cycles take place to a lesser degree within the time span of the so-called 7 root races, whilst a far vaster reach of time encompasses the globes, chains, and schemes. Humanity is somewhat disempowered in not understanding its past, which is the origin and purpose of the human soul. Also, there has not been a fixed time from which to reckon, by which to measure history. And saddled with the shortened chronology that is supposed to explain the entire unfoldment of the human race, a distorted reality has been created. The spiritual path is one of forever peeling back layers of illusion, and the mystery of human evolution is one of the greatest secrets yet to be fully revealed. As noted earlier, modern science and the secret sciences roughly concur on some of the big cosmic cycles. Yet it is ironic that in the time scales for the sciences, such as archaeology and anthropology, there is required a huge addition of time for the birth of civilization, from 3000 to 4000 BC back to 18.5 million years. Equating the esoteric record of time with the current accepted geological record, there is a massive subtraction of time, from around 65 million years for the Jurassic Age down to 28 to 20 million years for the esoteric doctrine. The big dinosaurs may well have existed 65 million years ago, yet the esoteric doctrine states that the reptile extinction was closer to 20 million years ago. Disparities and contradictions abound, yet they are not unresolvable or irreconcilable. Consider that around 500 years ago, it was thought that the sun orbited the Earth and that the Earth was flat. Now, that illusion has been stripped away and transcended thanks to the astronomer Copernicus. Yet despite all the amazing scientific advances since then, accompanied by expansions of human consciousness with regard to Earth's true history, in some ways we still live in relatively medieval times. Now, humanity's next phase of penetrating the veil of Maya is to understand just exactly how old it is. Time is an illusion. Yet just as a human being has its allotted lifespan, so do all other lives, plants, solar systems, galaxies, races, civilizations, and nations. All entities, therefore, have a measurable cycle in which to achieve certain goals in their evolutionary pattern. Esoteric cycles are based upon the astronomical precession of the Earth orbiting the Sun. It takes 2,160 years for the Sun to precess through one sign of the zodiac. From here, all the greater cycles are measured.
In this simple table, the chronology of science is on the right-hand side, whilst the chronology of the secret sciences is on the left. The figures are in millions of years. Even though there are large disparities between the figures, when more understanding of the process of dating the Earth is acquired, these figures will concur with one another. In this table, we can see that the astronomical precession cycle of 2,160 years is the basis for all the greater cycles, of how 12 of these cycles create a great year of 25,920 years, of how multiples of the 4,320 cycle create the figures of the Hindu yugas. And then as we move down the table, we can see how these yugas mathematically compose the Mahayugas and the Manvantaras, or rounds. Eventually, a day of Brahma is reached, delineating the time for an entire globe period, or one incarnation. In each globe incarnation of Earth, there are 7 major cycles of evolution, also called rounds. The rounds are composed of 2 cycles each, called Manvantaras, that total 14 in all. The rounds are cycles wherein the life wave of human spirits incarnate through a planetary scheme and its chains and globes. This human life wave experiences life in all kingdoms, starting with the mineral, vegetable, animal, human, and finally the kingdom of souls.
What is our purpose as spiritual monads to embark upon such a long journey through all the kingdoms? Part of the answer to this mystery is to evolve and grow, and to bring evolution upon Earth to perfection, eventually to the status of a so-called sacred planet. This has ramifications for the greater life of the solar system and its own evolution as a whole. We can see, therefore, the inseparability of ourselves from the great Creator and all kingdoms in nature, for they are all modes of expression for this great being to redeem, purify, and transform into higher consciousness, thereby eventually joining a greater evolution with the other planets in the solar system.
Now, the rounds are the cycles of time of the various groupings of monads that cycle through the globe and chain of a particular scheme. The rounds extend for a period of 617 million years, and they are composed of 2 manvantaras, which are 308 odd million years each. And so there is a certain in-breathing and out-breathing of these manvantaras, or cycles of time.
In each of the great cycles we call rounds, there are 7 root races. Combined with the 7 rounds, this makes a total of 7 times 7, or 49 root races in a globe period. As above, so below. Just as we explored the 49 globes of the planetary scheme, so this evolution is reflected in the 49 root races in just one globe period. These rounds and root races provide the physical body of incarnational experience for our Earth Logos. Human souls are light cells within this greater body of God. Within each root race are 7 subraces, and within each subrace are 7 branch races. 7 times 7 times 7 equals 343 races, all with their allotted cycles, providing a highly diversified human expression throughout the ages. The branch races, in their turn, give birth to the nations.
A root race is a planned unfoldment of consciousness, where a certain archetype is created by the so-called Manu of the races, and various civilizations unfold within that particular time period of a root race, which of course encapsulates 7 sub-races and 7 branch races within each sub-race, giving many, many different incarnations and possibilities of civilizations, and of course all the soul groupings, the 7 ray soul groupings, who incarnate through those particular branch races and sub-races and root races to gain experience, and of course all aim towards enlightenment and liberation ultimately.
Hence the nations that come and go are the leaves upon this tree of life. They have their autumns and springs and constitute the shortest cycles of a few thousand years. The smaller branches that support the leaves are the branch races with cycles that correspond to a 26,000-year precession cycle. The larger branches embody the much larger cycles of the subraces. The trunk of the tree represents the largest cycle embodied by a root race. All the races and subraces that evolve are seeds for the next level of evolution. All races and subraces have a long overlap, so whilst one race is unfolding, it will give birth to another distinct race that will unfold on a partially parallel timeline. Although this is a 2-dimensional diagram, we can think of time and evolution as spiralic. The root races started around 150 million years ago, during the latter part of that immense cycle we call the 4th round. The first 2.5 human races were in the subtle or etheric realm, and gradually evolved into a physical form with skin and bones in the middle of the 3rd root race of Lemuria. Human bodies were enormous in those times, but through development of the mental principle, became smaller and more refined.
Halfway through the 3rd or Lemurian root race, in the precise evolutionary cycle, a magnificent preordained spiritual event occurred on earth. It was the coming of the Lords of Flame who imparted the spark of mind to humanity. This was a humanity who were hitherto only members of the animal kingdom, with animal instinctual awareness and in reality no mind. This period is known as individualization, and it is where Earth's greatest mysteries lay hidden. The Lords of Flame are also known as Kumaras and emanated from an evolution from within the Earth scheme called the Venus chain. It was an evolution associated with Venus, but not from the planet Venus per se. Remember, each planet is a scheme of chains and globes, which are a microcosm of the great solar system. The planets sing together, creating the music of the spheres, a cosmic symphony. The presence of these 105 Kumaras created a great influx of force, so powerful that a mighty storm raged over the planet, destroying most of the animal kingdom, dinosaurs and humans alike.
The advent of the Lords of the Flame, the electrical storm which ushered in the period of man, was distinguished by disaster, chaos, and the destruction of much of the animal kingdom. The spark of mind was implanted in humanity. The strength of its vibration and the immediate effect of its presence caused the death of the animal form, thus producing the immediate possibility of the newly vitalized soul bodies, vibrating to such purpose that new physical bodies were taken for incarnation.
This individualization period occurred in the third branch race of the third subrace of the third root race, Lemuria, expressed as 333. The number 3 relates to the Universal Mother who births all forms. The individualization process started 21.6 million years ago, the chronology of the secret sciences that pinpoints the death of the dinosaurs. After a few million years, the individualization process for various groupings of humans culminated 18.6 million years ago, with the final registering of this spark of mind. Consciousness was not instantaneously received, like turning on a light switch. Groups of souls needed special attention by the guides of the race in this 3 million year period to fan their spark into a flame. During this period, another miraculous evolution occurred. The future humans, who were hitherto members of the animal kingdom with only instinctual consciousness, were hermaphrodite also. In other words, they reproduced themselves without the aid of any mate. Thus, hermaphrodite humanity gradually transformed into a two-sexed species over this 3 million year period. By the time the process was completed, it corresponded to the completion of the individualization period 18.6 million years ago in the 5th subrace of Lemuria. Male and female then started to reproduce the way humans do today. Adam and Eve in the garden represented this separation of the sexes, whilst the eating of the apple was the gaining of consciousness. This biblical story will be covered in greater detail in this series.
If we study the individualization period, we can find most of the mysteries of humanity are encoded around this time. The period of individualization represented the awakening of humanity, who were previously part of the animal kingdom, unawakened pretty much with animal consciousness at that time. It occurred back in Lemurian times, halfway through the Lemurian root race, and it was kick-started or triggered by the so-called Lords of Flame, who came from an evolution within the Earth scheme. This evolution within the Earth scheme is associated with Venus, but it was not Venus per se. The presence of these beings, these Kumaras or Lords of Flame, created an electrical field around the planet that ended up destroying most of the animal kingdom at that time. And this was probably the true period of the death of the dinosaurs. It was the death of the human forms at that time who were part of the animal kingdom, but they reincarnated after this period with causal bodies or souls. The spark of mind was born. This occurred around about 21.5 million years ago, but it took about 3 million years to fan the spark of mind into a greater flame, so to speak. And over this 3 million year period, humanity became individualized in various ray groupings around the planet. So animal man at the time went from instinctual consciousness to individual self-consciousness. They became self-aware. And this particular period is delineated in Genesis, in the Bible, where Adam and Eve knew each other. This was the time of individualization, sort of more or less mythologically expressed.
This table shows the timeline that corresponds to these sub-race events in Lemuria.
Gradually, all the Lords of Flame, their work completed, returned to the Venusian evolution within the Earth scheme. Yet 7 of these Kumaras stayed, the chief of whom is called Sanat Kumara, or Melchizedek, also known as the Watcher, or the Ancient of Days. He presides over humanity until the last weary pilgrim struggles home. In other words, until the last of humanity achieves liberation. This was also the time of the establishment of the planetary center called Shambhala, over which Sanat Kumara presides.
The following table shows that Shambhala's establishment coincided with human individualization. The being whose body is our planet utilizes the human races for expression. Here again, we see our inseparability from deity, and that our evolution contributes to the greater evolution, and vice versa. In the table, we can see these chronological correspondences with the sub-races and root races.
The humanity of that ancient time was enormous in stature, though evolution has been refining and decreasing in size up to our present day. Even over 4 million years ago, when the final destruction of Lemuria occurred, just before the first Atlantean destruction, there were still very large giants. Indeed, the statues of Easter Island that are about 30 feet or 10 meters high are representative of the height of the giants of that time. Of all the mammalians, man is the only one whom science does not allow to have dwarfed down like all other animal frames. A decrease in size is allowed from the dinosaurs to the present-day reptiles, but not for man. This is partly due to the so-called lack of evidence of physical skeletons, because of factors such as the action of sand on the ocean floor upon bones, or that cremation was universal up to 100,000 years ago. This will also be explored in depth later in this series. Because such a small time period of 6,000 to 10,000 years for human development has been assigned by contemporary science, it does not allow sufficient time to entertain the idea that giant humans gradually decreased in size over a period of millions of years in parallel with the reptile kingdom. In other words, in Lemurian times, humans were about the height of dinosaurs. Over the past 20 million years, reptiles and humans have decreased to the size they are today.
So the Hidden History of Humanity project seeks to document and visit many sites around the world where these relics and artifacts remain of ancient civilizations, such as Tiahuanaco in South America, Cuzco in Peru, Easter Island, the ancient ruins of Greece, and many ruins around the Mediterranean. Their extent across the whole planet. In fact, this architecture is called Cyclopean pentagonal architecture, which are odd-sized blocks, but quite often with 5 sides, fitting perfectly into one another and creating earthquake-proof walls and buildings. And so we have many instances of ruins extant around the world that have this kind of architecture. For instance, in Mycenae in Greece, we have these marvelous ruins that look like they've been built by giants. And in fact, part of the Hidden History of Humanity project looks at the evolution of the human form from giants down to the size that we are today. And in fact, these giants built, in fact, we were talking about Cyclopean architecture, we're talking about the Cyclops, the legendary giants with the one eye. And these giants did exist back in Lemurian times and actually physically manhandled these enormous blocks that weighed many tons into position.
The Titans of old and the Cyclops, legendary three-eyed mortals, belong to the 4th Atlantean root race. All their subsequent legends and allegories are found in the Hindu Puranas, the Greek myths, and Homer, based upon hazy reminiscences of real Titans, men of superhuman, tremendous physical power, which enabled them to defend themselves and hold at bay gigantic monsters of the geological Mesozoic and early Cenozoic times.
In the mythology of the ancient Cyclops, the 3 giants with one eye are said to represent the last 3 subraces of that newly conscious Lemurian race. At the peak of physical development in Atlantis, they have been described as towering giants of godly strength and beauty, and the depositaries of all the mysteries of heaven and earth. The giants of both Lemuria and Atlantis were able to build large structures and lift enormously heavy slabs of stone, but also had at their disposal technologies that allowed stones weighing many tons to be lifted effortlessly. An imperishable record about the gradual evolution of the races has been left for us in the Bamiyan statues of Afghanistan. They were created during the Atlantean flood, when initiate adepts of Atlantis were taking refuge in the Central Asian mountains. The 5 different sizes of these statues are said to represent the height of the 5 root races in their enormous early etheric stages and in their later, still gigantic, and then smaller physical development.
The civilizations in Lemuria and Atlantis also had access to technologies based upon sound that was able to create a vacuum and lift these blocks effortlessly, these blocks that weigh many tons, or to transport them from many miles away to their particular sites, such as Stonehenge is a good example of this. And in many of the mythological stories in South America, in the Celtic countries of Europe, we find very similar stories of a magician or a sorcerer who transported these stones from many miles away effortlessly through the air. The transport of these stones may seem like a magical process to us, but to those who had the knowledge, it was simply about rendering the atoms within these stones weightless. And this is the science of magic. It's important for humanity to understand their true origins because we really don't know. Most people do not think about history. They have a vague sort of idea that we came from somewhere, came from apes usually. This is what is taught in high school. And we evolved from apes somehow into human beings. Well, the secret doctrine states the opposite, that in fact apes were a byproduct of human evolution that went wrong at one stage back in Lemurian times. It was not part of the plan of planned evolution. These beings, the so-called narrow-headed, I think Blavatsky gives one term, bred with animals that created monsters, all sorts of hybrids that were unintended for the evolutionary goal. Apes of today are descendants from some of these hybrids and monsters that were created back then, and are a reminder of the human transgression that took place back in Lemurian times.
According to occult doctrine, humans bred with animals in Lemuria, creating an unnatural and unplanned linking. The hybrid monsters created were the ancestors of our modern apes. At individualization, certain groups of souls refused to incarnate because they regarded the bodies at their disposal as too coarse. They were ultimately responsible for the groups of humans that caused this evolutionary anomaly, the so-called sin of the mindless. The modern-day orangutan is a peculiarly human reminder of that ancient transgression, and today these apes are getting much publicity because their habitats are being destroyed in Indonesia through rainforest logging. When the unplanned inbreeding occurred with animals, the celestial guides immediately struck some groups with sterility in order to halt that which was not in the program of the divine plan. Can we imagine if this one fact of the secret sciences was considered? That apes were created by humans breeding with animals? What a dramatic revolution in consciousness would take place in how humanity views itself. Currently, in educational institutions, a 5,000 to 10,000 year history of the human race is taught, and that it evolved from apes. Humanity, however, has a much more divine and ancient pedigree. Madagascar was once part of the Lemurian continent and boasts dozens of species of lemur monkeys. Lemuria was originally part of a long prolongation of land, but the main continent extended from Madagascar in the west, encompassing India, Australia, and Indonesia, right across the Pacific Ocean, taking in Easter Island, Hawaii, and parts of the Americas. Australia is the largest surviving remnant of this once vast supercontinent. The fledgling humanity during early Lemuria was under the guidance of divine beings said to emanate from celestial spheres far higher than our own, giving instruction in building, agriculture, fishing, and language. These divine beings are the source of modern speculations that Earth has had many visits from ancient aliens. These same speculations tend to attribute everything to them, which is not necessarily the case.
However, the mighty ones performed their great works and left behind them everlasting monuments to commemorate their visits. Every time they penetrated within our veil of illusion, they appeared at the beginning of every great year, or precession cycle of 26,000 years. In ancient Chaldea, these beings were called the Kabiri, or Kabarim, meaning the measure of the heavens. In order to prepare suitable candidates for initiation, it was decided about 17 million years ago to build an organization and a headquarters for the mysteries.
Today determines the astronomical conclusion of one precession cycle and the beginning of another. Can we again soon expect visits from the mighty ones, or are they already here? The many daily occurrences of UFO sightings may well indicate them making observations of how humanity is responding to its opportunities. There is no doubt that advanced beings have always assisted humanity. From the first Kumaras of ancient Lemurian times, who taught building and agriculture, to the Kabiri, who have visited every 26,000 years to seed another impulse for the next cycle. Yet Earth evolution has seen the perfection of many of its own who have chosen to remain behind and guide humanity. The masters of the wisdom and the adepts of Shambhala have possession of the secret knowledge that lays behind the ancient lost technologies such as pyramid building, lasers, and anti-gravity flying craft. All of these technologies have been gifts to humanity from the mighty ones, whose origins may go well beyond the solar system to star systems, such as the Pleiades, Orion, or Sirius. Yet because of abuses of those gifts, these God-given things have been taken back, as a parent takes matches away from a child. The ancient wisdom has had a veil thrown over it, yet in the past century, that very same veil is starting to reveal what has been hidden for so long.
The revitalization of the ancient mystery teachings is extremely important at this time because it parallels the externalization of the hierarchy who have been behind the scenes watching over human evolution for the last 3 or 4 million years, and who of course are about to re-externalize again. So when the hierarchy re-externalize back amongst humanity, who will be walking amongst humanity, this has not happened for a long time. It will also be a catalyst for the reinstitution of the mystery schools, and where candidates for initiation can go to these mystery schools and learn the ageless wisdom, participate in group meditation, and prepare themselves as candidates for initiation.
Unlike ancient times, when the human race was guided by mighty celestial beings, the guidance now comes mainly from the secret adepts, those who have run the full gamut of human existence and become perfected, whose spirits have triumphed over matter and who can bend matter to their will, who now serve humanity by watching over and guiding their progress, allowing as much as possible for human free will to determine its own destiny. Yet this inner government of the planet surely interacts with and regulates the presence of extraterrestrial visitors. In our current fifth root race, there is an accent upon the perfection of the lower mind, somewhat to the exclusion of the more subtle senses of the intuition and the inner wisdom. Hence, we must be careful not to interpret ancient texts, symbols, and statues literally or too materialistically, especially if we lack an understanding of the subtle constitution of man. The ancients were far more poetic and artistic in their expression of the inner secrets. Many phenomena can be speculated to have origins beyond our earth, and indeed, there are some who look entirely through this prism. Yet many phenomena, if not most, are generally generated within the earth due to the law of cause and effect or karma, and the rectification of natural laws and principles which govern earth life. In the days of Lemuria and Atlantis, humanity had not developed these marvelous technologies with their own minds. Today, however, we are just starting to recover some of those lost gifts through our own mental development that has evolved since those times. The mighty ones must surely be watching on with interest and readiness in case we look like destroying our planet through repeating past abuses.
So the reason for this series of documentaries is to really illustrate how the true history of humanity has unfolded and how humanity can be empowered by knowing its true origins and knowing where it stands today in time and space. And this will help people to make decisions about their future and to play their part far more consciously within the greater divine plan.
In Part 1 of the Hidden History of Humanity documentary, we covered an introduction to the grander scheme of cosmos and the enormous cycles of the Manvantaras that circulate through the chains and globes of our Earth scheme. This involved the consideration of the Hindu yugas and astronomical precession cycles, plus the cyclical nature of time, all inextricably linked with the unfoldment of the root races, sub-races, and nations, in short, the history of civilization. We examined the idea of human individualization in ancient Lemuria and the implantation of the spark of mind that started the evolution of consciousness throughout the root races. This period of planetary history encompasses the profound mystery of the origin of the human soul. The nature of the planetary center we call Shambhala was explored, plus those who guide humanity, the lords of the flame, the mighty ones, and the masters of wisdom. In Part 2 of the Hidden History of Humanity documentary, we will review the original Shambhala as the Temple of Ibez, located in South America. Also, the evolution of the Atlantean root race, giants, megalithic constructions, and the Great Atlantean War, as told in the ancient epic, the Mahabharata. We will detail how the two great world wars of the last century were a recapitulation of the war in Atlantis, a conflict between the forces of light and the forces of materialism, still ongoing today. Plato's Atlantis is also mentioned as an important source of the ageless wisdom. This will lead us to the consideration of the role of the Egyptian and Mayan traditions and their relevance in modern times, leading into the coming sixth root race. We will explore the importance of Britain, the United States, and Brazil as a triangle of nations preparing us for the sixth root race, imminent Earth changes and cataclysms, the year 2025, and the reappearance among humanity of the Masters of Wisdom for the first time since those ancient Atlantean days. All these changes will be occurring on the eve of the Aquarian cycle, where spiritual initiation will be achieved en masse, and the expansion of human consciousness will go steadily forward. This period of awakening is upon a higher turn of the evolutionary spiral to humanity's individualization, which occurred in ancient Lemuria when the planetary center known as Shambhala was established. It is highly likely that this original Shambhala outpost could have been in Brazil or the region of Lake Titicaca, straddling Peru and Bolivia. In these early Lemurian times, human bodies were gigantic and clumsy, requiring instruction in what we now call Hatha Yoga, in order to coordinate the etheric body with the physical. This was the first spiritual goal for humanity and represented the first initiation.
In order to prepare suitable candidates for initiation, it was decided about 17 million years ago to build an organization and a headquarters for the mysteries, and to have a band of adepts and celestial guides who would function in physical bodies to meet the need of the rapidly awakening humanity. These beings incarnated as kings and priests of nations, the instructors of humanity. The Ibizan adepts had to deal with the humanity that was in its infancy, whose polarization was most unstable, and whose coordination was very imperfect. There was very little mentality to be found, as we know it today, and humans were practically altogether astral in their expression. They functioned even more consciously on the astral plane than on the physical, and it was part of the work of the guides of the race, working under instruction from Shambhala, to develop the energy centers of humans, to stimulate the brain, and make them fully self-conscious on the physical plane.
The infant humanity of Lemurian and early Atlantean days had to be taught who they were by means of symbols and methods, which to us would be crude, impossible, and of a nature which the race should have transcended many millions of years ago. It was necessary in those days to employ methods more definitely physical than are permissible today. These methods of physical stimulation were employed, and the laws of energy, as they work through the various chakras, were taught until the time came when another big change was made and the door of initiation was opened. Their objective was to bring about a realization of the kingdom of God within. It was felt at the time that man was then self-centered enough and individualized enough to permit of a drastic change in method and practice. All this took a vast period of time.
So humanity were imbued with the spark of mind, but it wasn't the type of consciousness, mental consciousness that we have today. It was very, very slow and different. They had huge bodies at that time as well. The bodies were not refined, they were somewhat clumsy, and so the first yoga of the Lemurian race was Hatha Yoga, the coordination of the etheric body and the physical body. So what we had in the fifth sub-race of the Lemurian root race was the completion of the individualization period, but also the separation of the sexes. And humanity started reproducing the same way we do today.
Almost immediately after individualization in Lemuria's fifth subrace, the Atlantean fourth root race came into existence and developed in parallel with the Lemurians for millions of years. It was in the Atlantean race that two-eyed sight evolved over a few million years, replacing the original all-seeing eye of the Lemurians. There were three-eyed beings in that interim period that also had 4 arms. Gradually over the next few million years, as the Atlantean or fourth root race came into fuller expression in its first few sub-races, this all-seeing eye at the top of the head receded into the brain, where its remnant, the pineal gland, sits today. Two-eyed sight represented the development of mind, and in one sense, duality. From one perspective, the Lemurians were far more spiritual, whilst the Atlanteans were deeply immersed in matter. But it can be misleading to think this way. The ancient story of the fall is simply the fall into matter by human souls and not necessarily a fall from spiritual grace. The fall from grace was the refusal of a group of souls to incarnate, thus bearing responsibility for the so-called sin of the mindless referred to earlier.
A long time later, after the separation of the sexes, humanity's spiritual vision became dim, and the third eye began to lose its power. The third eye was getting gradually petrified and soon disappeared. When the fourth root race arrived at its middle age, the inner vision had to be awakened and acquired by artificial stimuli, the process of which was known to the old sages.
The science of initiation was introduced by Shambhala's masters and adepts in order to hasten evolution because our Earth scheme had fallen behind in the previous cycle of the moon chain, deemed a failure. Hence, Earth has 2 major groupings of souls today, those who individualized on the moon and Earth chains respectively. Moon chain souls are far more developed in their mental capacity and to a degree spiritually. However, there is now a rapid acceleration by their Earth chain counterparts in this current 5th root race, the race where the mental principle has reached its apotheosis. It is said that the respective difference between capital and labor and several other conflicts on this planet are expressions of the difference between moon chain and Earth chain souls.
Essentially, there are 2 types of souls upon this planet. There are those who evolved in the moon chain evolution, who individualized in the moon chain evolution, and those who individualized in the Earth chain evolution in our civilization we call Lemuria. And the Earth chain evolution is a long way behind the moon chain evolution in terms of mental capacity that has been evolved, but they are rapidly catching up in this fifth root race, which is all about manas or mind. Yet still the moon chain souls are more advanced in many ways in terms of just their soul age, if you like. But it's getting to a point on the planet where there is a synthesis taking place between the earth chain and moon chain evolutions, and this too will take place in the age of Aquarius in the greater 25,000 year cycle, and to a degree in the lesser 2,160 year cycle.
The early subraces of the fourth Atlantean root race saw an acceleration of consciousness take place, caused mainly by the large influx of souls from the moon chain. They had been held over in a kind of sleep state called pralaya, waiting for earth chain humanity to catch up in their mental development, relatively speaking. In Atlantis, many scientific technologies were gifted by the guides of the race to humanity. Astronomy and astrology came about. The arts and sciences were developed. In the esoteric sciences, it is estimated that this period was around 10 million years ago. Other gifts were the artificial awakening of psychic perception within the race. Yet this was ultimately misused and abused, as was the developing mental principle.
And so for several million years we had the subraces of Lemuria intermingling with the subraces of Atlantis. The first few subraces of Atlantis and the latter subraces of Lemuria. They warred with each other, they interacted with each other, they mated with each other. There was a lot that we don't know about this period. And so the consciousness in Atlantean times was relatively unevolved. They were mainly emotionally or astrally polarized. And so the guides of the race awakened them artificially. They had the third eye factor in their consciousness awakened, and they were able to see psychically. And because they had not developed the mental capacity so much, they were given many gifts of technology by the guides of the race. And yet many of these things, these powers that they were given were abused, and this is why the guiding hierarchy of the time forced humanity to make a choice, because these abuses were getting so out of control. And one of the major abuses was the crime of theft, of desiring anything that others wanted and appropriating it for themselves. There was also sex magic, black magic of all kinds. The humanity of that time were far more emotionally polarized. They hadn't really developed the mental function so strongly except for the initiates and disciples of that time. Of course, we're told that Krishna and the Buddha were initiated in a particular ashram during Atlantean times, and they were the foremost, they were the cream of the crop, they were the foremost initiates of that time. This particular evolution of a certain percentage of disciples from the Atlantean time also forced this cleavage between light and matter, you see. And it represented, in terms of looking at the whole chain or globe period from the greater perspective, the deepest incarnation into matter for the planetary logos at that time. So it was a huge planetary crisis and a kind of initiation of sorts for the planetary logos.
Toward the middle period of the Atlantean civilization, in the fourth branch race, fourth subrace of this fourth root race, or 444, about 4 million years ago, emerged a great crisis caused by the abuses of selfishness and materialism. The watching guides of the race who walked amongst humanity and who were leaders and kings of nations had to draw a line, declaring, "This is the way of light. There is the way of darkness. Humanity, make your choice." This ultimatum precipitated the Atlantean conflict, as told in the Hindu epic, the Mahabharata. it represented the deepest point of incarnation into matter for our earth deity.
The esoteric doctrine tells us that there was one group composed of Lemurians and Atlanteans who were initiated in the divine doctrine of pure revelation. Yet there was another group who inhabited the lost Atlantis and were born with a sight which embraced all hidden things and was independent of both distance and material obstacle. Their sight was unlimited, and they knew all things at once. They were natural-born mediums who neither struggled nor suffered to obtain their knowledge, nor did they acquire it at the price of any sacrifice. The first group walked in the path of their divine instructors, acquiring their knowledge by degrees, learning at the same time to discern the evil from the good. The second group blindly followed the insinuations of the great and invisible king Thivatat, who had neither learned nor acquired knowledge. Thus, under the evil insinuations of this king, the Atlantean race became a nation of wicked magicians.
These so-called lords of materiality still have a strong influence on humanity, still immersed in the eternal struggle between light and darkness today. This period of time was the Kali Yuga cycle of the fourth Atlantean root race. The Kali Yuga is the age of death and destruction, and the Atlantean race was giving birth to the next, fifth root race. It was the period of the fourth branch race, of the fourth subrace, of the fourth root race, or 444, rapidly approaching the fifth branch race, which would be the seed for this fifth root race. Thus, 444 became 445. The Hindu story of the Mahabharata, of which the Bhagavad Gita is the golden kernel, recalls the first major conflict in Atlantis, where the forces of materialism were ranged against the forces of light.
What is this mad and shameful weakness? Stand up and fight.
I'm in anguish. I can't see where my duty lies. Teach me.
What is Krishna doing?
He's speaking to Arjuna.
What is he saying?
He's telling Arjuna that victory and defeat are the same. He's urging him to act, but not to reflect on the fruit of the act. He says to him, seek detachment. Fight without desire.
You say, forget desire, seek detachment. Yet you urge me to battle, to massacre. Your words are ambiguous. I am confused.
Krishna tells him, don't withdraw into solitude. Renunciation is not enough. You must act, yet action mustn't dominate you.
The sons of King Pandu were the emerging initiates of the next race. Arjuna is one of the well-known characters who worked closely with Krishna. The Pandu brothers were the vanguard of the Atlantean race, destined to be the prototypes of the new fifth root race, also called the Aryan race, from the Sanskrit Arya, meaning noble, not the modern misnomer distorted by fascist thinking. 4 million years ago, the Kali Yuga age of death and destruction was in progress in the fourth root race, whilst an overlapping Satya Yuga, or Golden Age, was starting for the fifth root race.
In the heart of action, you must remain free from all attachment.
How can I put into practice what you are demanding of me? The mind is capricious, unstable. It's evasive, feverish, turbulent, tenacious. It's harder to subdue than taming the wind.
You must learn to see with the same eye a mound of earth and a heap of gold, a cow and a sage, a dog and the man who eats the dog. There's another intelligence beyond the mind.
This table shows us that the period of 3102 BC was the start of the Kali Yuga for the 5th root race. And this cycle will continue for another 427,000 years. This date has been one of the problems that have caused major misunderstandings for Western scholars and Hindu pundits, who have incorrectly dated the Mahabharata based upon a limited Western viewpoint, strongly influenced by the Christian timeline of history.
Arjuna's brother, Yudhishthira, symbolically opened the Kali Yuga era. He was an actual king who lived in 3102 years BC, but his name is associated with the Great Deluge at the time of the first sinking of Atlantis, around 4 million years ago, just after the finish of the Great War. Hence the confusion, as the esoteric teachings that are woven into the religious traditions are full of blinds and veils to protect the teaching from the profane. Again, because of cultural misconceptions over the centuries in both the East and the West, considering anything outside of several thousand years is a place few have wished to venture. At this critical juncture in the middle of the Atlantean race, initiates were emerging as candidates for the Golden Age or Satya Yuga of the 5th root race. They were in direct conflict with those who wanted to maintain their old ways of materialism, the acquisition of luxury, and the foulest sorceries. The majority of the Atlanteans pursued anything they desired and appropriated it. They were completely immersed in the darkest expression and distortions of their Kali Yuga period. According to the ancient scriptures, part of the Mahabharata war was fought in flying craft known as Vimana, today known as UFOs. This information can be found in the ancient Hindu text, the Vimanika Shastra. That technology, along with the knowledge of pyramid building and solar power, etc., has been in existence for a very long time. They were some of the gifts to the race alluded to earlier. After the war was fought, the first Atlantean flood engulfed the earth, resulting in a large portion of Atlantis sinking entirely beneath the sea. According to the doctrine of the secret sciences, both the war and the flood occurred about 4 million years ago. Following the crisis of individualization in Lemurian times, this war and flood was the second great crisis in the history of humanity, corresponding to the second release of energy from Shambhala, the home of Sanat Kumara, Lord of the world. These impacts of energy have been called the Shambhala impacts and correspond closely to the essence of each root race. Hence, the figures 333, 444, and 555 express the branch race of the subrace of the root race. They are deeply philosophical numerically and are also literal points in history. Each impact has been destructive, yet they have destroyed the obstacles that have prevented human progress and ultimately regenerated the world.
Whenever the history of the universal flood is told, the story of Noah is not very far away. No matter what tradition or by what name he is called, Nyuha in the Hindu tradition or Noki in the Andean civilizations, Noah's story is allegorical, deeply symbolic, and literal.
Noah was the Hindu Manu, also called Vaisvata Manu, guide of the new emerging fifth root race. Manus are highly evolved beings who set the archetype and destiny for a race. The Manu Noah's reign spanned the interim period between the destruction of the fourth Atlantean root race and the emerging fifth root race. The story of the animals boarding the ark 2 by 2 is literal, no doubt, but also an allegory for the scattered remnants of humanity. They were so recalcitrant in their old ways that, in the words of one adept, they were salvaged in spite of themselves.
So, in light of these 10 Hindu Manus and their Jewish patriarch equivalents, we can consider Noah as the 10th patriarch, who is equivalent to the Hindu Vaisvata Manu. And we have stories in the Bible and in many other traditions around the world in different mythologies of this being who built a large ark and collected animals 2 by 2 and sailed around the world and rescued them. This is the story of the great flood of Atlantis that engulfed most of the planet and only left the mountaintops existent with a few survivors on them. And so the story of Noah's Ark is an allegory for humans being collected, possibly animals too. This being called Noah took all these remnants, or these animals, if you like, back to a location in the Himalayas where he basically bred them over a period of a few million years into a new race. And then when the time was ripe, about 1 million years ago, this race was released down into India as the first subrace of the fifth root race. And that was their Satya Yuga, that was the golden age of the Hindu race, where there was a very high type of civilization, a very high consciousness driving it as well. So you see this same kind of legend in South America where he's called Nuak, and the same type of story where he rescued the remnants of humanity. And in fact, if you look at the indigenous people, the Aymara people in Peru, you see that they are identical to the Tibetans. And it's quite likely that this Nuak individual took people from South America to a place in the Himalayas.
These various subraces and branch races that survived the flood were rescued by Noah on the highest reaches of mountains, where refuge had been found from the extraordinarily high floods that covered the entire planet. Over a period of a few million years, a synthesis of races was created, eventually to become the first Hindu subrace of the fifth root race. This race emerged about 1 million years ago in India. Again, incredulous viewers may find their traditional interpretation of history challenged by the wide disparity in time between the currently accepted date of 2,500 years BC for the Hindu civilization and 1 million years. There were 3 more Atlantean floods up until relatively recently. This has become a source of confusion for scholars chronologically, mistaking Plato's Atlantis as the only Atlantis and the only sinking, when in fact, the sinking of the various continents and islands of Atlantis spanned approximately 4 million years.
This table depicts the subraces that have emerged during the fifth root race. Note that the Hindu subrace is the first subrace, and hence the cradle of all Western races and nations. It was in the Golden Age, or Satya Yuga of India 1 million years ago, that the highest possible types of humanity incarnated as divine exemplaries of what the race could be.
All the Western subraces are derived from the first subrace of this fifth root race, which was the Hindu. And this is about 1 million years ago. So the subrace of the fifth root race manifested in what we call India today. And the other subraces came into being over the last 1 million years. So we have the second subrace, which was the Egyptian Mayan, which had its origins in the south of India, which is now sunk in the Indian Ocean. We have the third subrace, which is the Semitic. We have the fourth subrace, which is the Celtic Latin. And we have the fifth subrace, which is the Teutonic, Germanic, Anglo-Saxon.
The Hindu subrace is the foundation of all the Western races, most of whose languages can be traced back to their root stem, Sanskrit. The succeeding subraces emerged in roughly 200,000-year intervals.
Well, we are told in the Ageless Wisdom teachings that Sansa is the ancient language of the gods and that it preceded Sanskrit. And Sanskrit, of course, is the ancient language of the Hindus, so Sansa has to be older, at least older than 1 million years, and was probably the main language of the adepts during Atlantean times. It's a symbolic language, and it is there, still exists in the ethers for us to tap into if we so choose.
The genesis of the Egyptians and Mayans is very ancient, no less than 860,000 years ago. Both groups came from a now sunken part of southern India, the ancient Tamil Nadu, of which Sri Lanka is the remnant. They traveled at the time of the Second Atlantean submersion, finding their way to Ethiopia and Guatemala respectively. Hence the similarity of their esoteric knowledge, rituals, architecture, art, pyramids, astronomy, customs, etc., not only with one another, but also with Mother India. Both groups acted as a bridge between the old Atlantean races and the new fifth root race, though strictly speaking, in consciousness, they were of the fifth root race. Nevertheless, their genesis goes back a long way into Atlantean history.
The second great deluge happened around about 860,000 years ago, which was the start of the second subrace of the fifth root race. The Egyptians went to what is now known as Ethiopia and gradually worked their way down the Nile over hundreds of thousands of years, and the Mayans went further to Guatemala. And again, we have these language keys to tracing these civilizations. For instance, there are many words used in the Mayan language which resemble words in the language of Sri Lanka. So these are very important keys to tracing civilizations and their cross-fertilization with one another. In that second deluge of Atlantis, apparently most of the Atlantean giants met their watery fate. They were wiped off the face of the earth, and a lot of these giants had great magical powers and wreaked a lot of destruction over a long period of time. The third deluge happened around about 270,000 years ago, and the fourth and final deluge of Atlantis happened with the sinking of Poseidon, the last island that remained just out of the so-called Pillars of Hercules near the Mediterranean. And this last sinking of the cycles occurred around about 13,000 years ago.
This table depicts the 4 major yuga cycles of this 5th root race, which spans almost 4 million years. The corresponding ages as they were known in Greece are displayed, as well as the durations of these cycles with their respective manus, divine archetypes of the race. Note the being called Asura Maya, intimately associated with the Mayans, and source of the most hidden knowledge regarding astronomy, astrology, and cycles.
Egypt has been the repository and guardian of the world's mystery tradition for about 800,000 years. Pyramid technology had been around for millions of years before that, as has the science of astronomy, going back at least 3.24 million years into the Atlantean period.
The astronomical records of universal history are said to have had their beginnings in the 3rd subrace of the 4th root race, or the Atlanteans. Ancient knowledge demonstrates that even since the time of the regular establishment of the zodiacal calculations in Egypt, the poles have been thrice inverted. Occult lore states that the poles are inverted every 1,080,000 years. Likewise, other popular subjects of researchers have invaluable clues, such as Stonehenge. Archaic records show the initiates of the 2nd subrace of the 5th root race, moving from one land to the other for the purpose of supervising the building of menhirs and dolmens, of colossal zodiacs in stone. The fact of their crossing from France to Great Britain by land may give an idea of the date when such a journey could have been performed on terra firma.
Hence, Stonehenge and many other constructions in Europe are much more ancient than hitherto speculated, up to 860,000 years old. Note also that these enormous structures were erected partly through the brute strength of the giants of that race.
Had there been no giants to move about such colossal rocks, there could never have been a Stonehenge, a Karnak in Brittany, France, and other such cyclopean sculptures. If there had not been such a thing as magic, there could never have been so many witnesses to oracular and speaking stones.
Magic here also refers to the utilization of the science of sound to erect those structures. In the near future, there will be seen the reappearance of the faculty of the Lemurians and early Atlanteans to raise great masses, this time on a higher turn of the evolutionary spiral. These monuments were raised through the ability of the early builders to create a vacuum through sound, nullifying the force of gravity and utilizing it for their own purposes. This fact is elsewhere corroborated in many parts of the world, where stories abound of priests who used mantrams or harmonious chants to raise huge weights effortlessly. Likewise, the power of sound was used to destroy.
In the Christian Bible is the tale of Jericho, a story that has descended to us from Atlantean times. In those days, the use of sound on physical and emotional levels was understood and practiced, being utilized for selfish and materialistic ends in most of the cases. When trumpets were sounded a certain number of times after a rhythmical circuit of the walls of Jericho, those walls collapsed. This was made possible by the secret knowledge of the leaders of the people, who, being versed in the science of sound, and having studied its destructive and creative effects, knew just the moment to apply that science and effect the desired end.
Megalithic sites are very important for tracing the hidden history of humanity and all the civilizations that have come and gone. And this is because they tell us, they speak to us about the past, about the consciousness that designed the various temples and buildings and pyramids and so forth. We can find ruins that are not so sophisticated, reflecting the consciousness of that particular civilization, and we can find ruins that are incredibly sophisticated and reflect a high consciousness which was driving that civilization at that time. The fact that we have many ruins on top of each other over many, many millions of years makes it very confusing to discern which civilization came first and which was older than the other. And so the Hidden History of Humanity project is about establishing or re-establishing the correct chronology for human evolution, because this human evolution is essentially the story of the human soul and the unfoldment of consciousness since that period back in Lemuria 21.5 million years ago, when individualization occurred.
Thus far, the viewer may still be incredulous at these extraordinarily long cycles being discussed here. Consider this. If the precession cycle of 25,920 years was known to the ancients, then they may well have studied and lived through those cycles at least a few times.
Pliny, the ancient Roman historian, writes that Epigenes attested to the fact that the Chaldeans preserved astral observations in inscriptions upon brick tiles, extending to a period of 720,000 years. Cicero, the Roman statesman and philosopher, somewhat indignantly relates the Babylonian priests' assertion that they had preserved upon monuments observations extending back 470,000 years. The Neoplatonist philosopher Simplicius, who lived in the 6th century AD, wrote that the Egyptians had kept astronomical observations and records for the past 630,000 years.
There are numerous examples of these kinds of figures from historians and philosophers like Pythagoras and Plato, who lived in our relatively recent history, but who were in touch with a much greater antiquity.
In Plato's ancient writings, he talks about this 9,000 years before his time, but this is also a veil for a greater period of time where he's talking about the second flood of Atlantis 900,000 years before his time. And so he's talking about two floods at the same time in his writings, because he was an initiate or a master, so his writings can be interpreted on several levels.
Why would these recognized and respected commentators in many fields contrive these figures independently of one another? Modern authors have also ignored data that is available to them in their own disciplines, such as the Hindu or Mayan systems for measuring time. As Wendell Phillips once said, we have a pitying estimate for the narrowness, ignorance, and darkness of the bygone ages. By ignoring the vast cycles of time discussed in the most ancient traditions of the East, mainstream and alternative investigators have arrived at dubious and far-fetched theories of dating history. This has come about through trying to address the disproportionate timescales between the mainstream theory of the dinosaur extinction 65 million years ago and the accepted theory of civilization emerging between 5 to 10,000 years ago. Hence, theories such as cataclysmic geology and crust slippage have been put forward over the past 100 years or more. Cataclysmic geology states that the geological timescale has been compressed by cataclysmic events, giving only several thousand years duration instead of the actual millions of years figures. This theory of cataclysmic geology stands in direct opposition to the most commonly held theory of uniformitarianism, the concept that the Earth's surface was shaped by gradual processes such as erosion and by small sudden changes such as earthquakes and floods. Perhaps the truth lays hid in the middle way between these two opposites?
Cataclysms come around regularly and cyclically through the rounds, the Manvantaras, the Yugas, and they come destroying with fire or with water or with wind, and they're created by cyclic events that are associated with the sun and the moon's gravitational pull on the earth, and no doubt other factors.
Geological cataclysms have come and gone for millennia, shaping the evolution of the Earth. Another middle way solution on the theme of chronology is that infant humanity emerged 20 million years ago, close to the dinosaur extinction. This is verified by teachings of the ageless wisdom. In concurrence with this alternative chronology is the esoteric doctrine's dating of the Cretaceous period at 16 million years ago, bringing discoveries such as fossilized human footprints in Cretaceous rocks into more reasonable contention. In crust slippage theory, the entire outer shell of the Earth moves approximately 2,000 miles like the loose skin of an orange. This theory was based upon the idea of continental drift that posits the existence of an ancient supercontinent called Pangaea or Gondwana land, where all current continents were joined together, gradually drifting apart. The ageless wisdom does not concur with these theories, but asks fair-minded investigators to consider that far older continents may lay hid beneath the ocean floor, whose strata have never been geologically explored.
In relation to the cataclysms that occur on the planet, the continents break up and sink, or they are raised from the ocean floor. And this is counter to the current scientific theory of Gondwana land, where we see this one supercontinent, all the continents joined together, then gradually through continental drift, drifting apart and creating the current position of the continents on the planet. Esoterically, this is not so. The continents actually sunk beneath into the Earth's crust and are raised again from the Earth's crust. So as we transition from this fifth root race to the sixth root race, we will see these continents re-emerging from the Earth's crust again and being raised up out of the ocean and creating new continents while other continents sink.
Like Lemuria and Atlantis, today's continents have several times been submerged and then reappeared, bearing new groups of humanity and civilizations. Ancient earthquakes, floods, and volcanic eruptions caused continents to sink, just as future geological upheavals will cause those same continents again to disappear and re-emerge. But in the latter's case, not identical to their old forms. The one causal factor that has always been behind these periodical renovations of the Earth has been the varied rotation of the Earth on its axis, caused by the magnetic pull of the Sun and Moon. This has led to decreased velocity of rotation, causing the waters to flow toward the polar lands, submerging them, whilst new lands arise in the middle equatorial regions. Hence, these periodic solar and lunar influences flatten the globe around the equator, making it go down in some places and swell up in others. The swelling runs toward the extremities of the poles, hence new lands arise and old ones are sucked under. Related to the phenomenon of decreased axial rotation are periodic tilts of the Earth's axis that bring on ice ages and floods, creating exterminations of civilizations, flora, and fauna. These are not random occurrences, but as described in the science of cycles, follow a universal pattern that acts at the appointed time in strict accordance and harmony with karmic law. According to the ancient wisdom, there have already been 4 axial disturbances where the old continents were engulfed by the oceans, other lands appeared, and huge mountain chains arose where there had been none before. The face of the globe was completely changed, yet each time it required several thousand years of remodeling. Humanity is today approaching another axial tilt in this transition phase between the 5th and 6th root races over the next 25,000 years. The esoteric doctrine states that another cause of Earth changes belongs to a grand cycle of 1,080,000 years where the planet is subjected to a complete physical revolution, resulting in the poles exchanging places. Today, the Earth is witness to the ending of one of these cycles that will bring on these changes. During this cycle, the poles slowly move toward the equator, whilst the tropical regions with their prolific flora and fauna move toward the poles. This is the reason why there is fossil evidence of tropical plants having existed where the freezing tundra regions are today. At the end of this approximately 1 million year cycle, changes in climate are accompanied by earthquakes and other disturbances, taking about 25,000 years to complete. Today, the magnetic North Pole is moving faster than at any time in human history, currently relocating towards Russia at a rate of about 40 miles a year. Hence, as the magnetic shift and eventual reversal of the poles continues, the physical reversal or flip of the poles will take place at axis tilting intervals in the next 25,000 years. This period will usher in the 6th root race. The 4th and final sinking of the Atlantean continents and islands was that of Poseidonus in 9564 BC. Plato's description of Poseidon's fate as 9,000 years is a reference to this latter period for Plato's time, several centuries BC. But it is also a veiled reference to the aforementioned second major sinking of Atlantis, which took place nearly 900,000 years ago. Atlantis was not in one particular place, as many investigators seem to think. Its islands and continents were scattered around the globe.
So ancient Atlantis was centered in the USA, where the USA is today, but it was scattered all over the globe. There was no one Atlantis to be found anywhere. Where many books are written about this, oh, I finally found Atlantis, but the author does not realize that Atlantis comprised many continents in the Atlantic Ocean, south of India, in the Pacific Ocean, and so forth. But we are told in the Ageless Wisdom teachings that the main continent, or the main hub of civilization of Atlantis, was centered in the USA. And so the North American Indians are actually remnants of the latter subraces of the fourth root race, of the Atlantean root race. Indeed, many of their rituals and customs are very similar to the Tibetan rituals and customs, and there have been several books written about this by academics. And so again, we have this connection. You know, there are various theories saying that they came over the land bridge in Alaska and so forth, but it more than likely has its origin with Noah and the ferrying of survivors to different parts of the world.
The Atlantis 900,000 years ago was a very large island continent, now sunk in the Atlantic Ocean. Plato's description of an Atlantean city was a generic blueprint for many Atlantean cities, the remains of which have been discovered in several locations in South America and elsewhere. And so the sub-races of the fifth root race evolved over the past 1 million years, warring incessantly with the remaining sub-races of the Atlanteans. The Manu for the third sub-race of the fifth root race was Abraham, founding father of the Jewish, Arab, and Afghani peoples. One character in Abraham's story was Ishmael, who represented the troublemaking capacity of the Atlantean consciousness.
Note that the three major root races elapsed thus far, and the crises of humanity are reflected in the numerals 333, 444, and 555, depicting branch race, subrace, and root race. The three periods in this table represent the three initiations or expansions of consciousness, representing control over the physical, emotional, and mental bodies respectively throughout the elapsed three root races. They also represent three releases of intense spiritual power from the crown chakra of the world, Shambhala.
Today, in Earth's crisis, it is entering the sixth branch race of the fifth subrace of the fifth root race. The sixth branch race is the seed for the coming sixth subrace, which will be the seed for the sixth root race, eventually based in South America over the next 25,000 years. The United States is playing a critical role as a bridge between the last subraces of the fifth root race and the beginnings of the sixth root race, initially based in Brazil.
So in the USA, we have a melting pot of races. We have black, white, brown, yellow, you name it. And it's creating a new blend color-wise, and where they say everyone will be brown eventually. And this will be probably the case in the sixth root race as it emerges in the next 25,000 years in South America. But I'm sure there'll be certain ethnic types who will retain their particular archetypal colors and DNA and so forth. But essentially we're looking at the sixth root race as being a blend of all of humanity that has ever been. And this is a revolutionary idea because it's never happened before in the history of the planet.
The sixth root race returns to the middle of South America, where the old power spots are gradually reawakening. The fifth root race is in its Kali Yuga cycle, just as the Kali Yuga was active in the previous cycle in Atlantis. As mentioned previously, This confusion of the Kali Yugas of the fourth and fifth root races led to major errors in chronology. It is said that ultimately, the fifth root race will be destroyed by fire, through volcanoes and earthquakes, just as the Atlantean race was destroyed by water.
Humanity today finds itself going into the sixth root race from the fifth root race. And we find ourselves in a similar position as we did back in Atlantean times when humanity was transitioning from the fourth root race to the fifth root race. And humanity had to make a choice at that time whether to follow the way of light or to stay with the way of materialism. And this brought on the Great War at that time. And we find ourselves in a similar position today as we move into the sixth root race and with all the same type of challenges for humanity to discern.
World Wars I and II are subjectively regarded as one war, a recapitulation of the ancient Mahabharata conflict, with the same forces ranged against each other, the so-called Lords of the Dark Face versus the Lords of Shining Countenance.
So it's important to understand today that we are in a third phase of the World War. It currently exists in the mental plane, but depending on humanity's choice, it could go to the physical plane as it did in World War I and II. World War I and II are regarded esoterically as one war and as a recapitulation of the Atlantean War, where the same forces were ranged on both sides. And this time, in World War I and II, the forces of light triumphed. The door where evil dwells, quote unquote, was sealed. But in the last 70 years since World War II, that door has drifted ajar somewhat, and the forces of materialism have refined and consolidated their position even more. So now we have this third phase of the World War that is raging upon the mental plane in terms of the world of ideas, ideologies, and so forth. And it is through conferencing, communications, politically, culturally, and so forth, that will bring about a resolution of this problem. But the point of least resistance, as it always has been for humanity, is to work it out on the physical plane through sheer force. And this is a real danger at the moment because the increasing Shambhala impacts, the increasing force of Shambhala, which we are told we had the fifth impact in the year 2000, is going directly to humanity, where hitherto had been veiled or filtered by the hierarchy. So the point of least resistance for humanity when they receive this Shambhala force is to use force, is the power of the will in its lower aspect. So these are the dangers we are facing, yet the hierarchy made a calculated risk to allow this Shambhala force to go directly to humanity because it's going to help speed up evolution and accelerate evolution. This planet has fallen way behind in its evolution. It should be at the same status as Venus, we're told in the Ageless Wisdom teachings. And the reason it isn't is because of the failure of the moon chain evolution, the previous chain to this earth chain.
It is interesting to note also that the lost Atlantean technologies are starting to re-emerge once more in this day and age. Also, since World War II, UFOs have been very prominent. Hence, the world is only just emerging from this recapitulation period. It is now upon the upward swing of the pendulum, from the middle period of the root races, but also the halfway mark of the entire planetary scheme. The war between these opposing forces of materiality and light still rages upon the mental plane, as humanity finds its way through the darkness before the dawn, toward the approaching Aquarian cycle, reminding us of William Blake's immortal words, "I will not cease from mental fight, nor shall my sword sleep in my hand." As a result of events that transpired at the end of the last World War, it is said that the great avatar known in the East as Maitreya and in the West as Christ will return again soon to walk amongst humanity.
The hierarchy have planned to externalize amongst humanity once again for the first time in about 3 or 4 million years. So we are really living in extraordinary times. The forces of materialism know this, are aware of this fact, and are fighting tooth and nail to keep the status quo the way it is, so that the forces of light do not manifest. So we are really emerging from a period of control by the forces of materialism, despite the fact that many thousands of people have reached liberation since that time. But overall, the planet has been in control by those forces.
Why have the Mayans come to assume such prominence in popular thought in the past 50 years? We have been told that there will be an alignment with the galactic center, yet is the end and beginning of 2 26,000-year precession cycles. This will be taking place in Aquarius on the Greater Wheel, coinciding with the more well-known 2,160-year cycle in Aquarius on the Lesser Wheel.
Hence, we are in a time of unique opportunity. 2 Aquarian cycles, a new precession cycle, will take humanity into the 6th root race proper in about 25,000 years' time. But Mayan elders and others connected to the secret wisdom do acknowledge that Earth changes will increase for the next few hundred years, and it is occurring with increasing frequency now. Humanity regards these kind of events as material disasters, yet they have always been cyclic in nature and accompany the shift of consciousness from one race to another, just as there is usually a new continent that is raised for the new race. Hence, parts of South America may sink, whilst other older landforms nearby may be raised out of the sea. The Mayan tradition points the way to South America and its role for a reawakened Shambhala, from where the Ancient of Days or the Lord of the World will resume his watch for the 6th root race. The Mayans' ancient base in Guatemala and the consciousness that was generated there is a bridge between North America with its synthesized European consciousness and the future 6th root race in South America. For thousands of years, Central America has played the role of a great meeting place for many cultures from the Pacific and the Atlantic Oceans. Currently, the main focus for Shambhala is in one of its branches somewhere in the Gobi Desert in Mongolia, existing in invisible etheric matter. As noted earlier, the original location of Shambhala in Lemurian times was in South America, whilst another branch of Shambhala was much later connected to the Mayans in Guatemala. Hence, a full circle cycle approaches, where the focus of this planetary crown chakra we call Shambhala will shift to South America once more. Occult lore states that during this period, Britain will sink entirely, whilst a large chunk of California will disappear.
Cataclysms will occur worldwide during the next 1,000 years. Continents will be shaken. Lands will be raised and submerged, culminating in the profound material disaster, which will overtake the world towards the close of the 5th root race. This will usher in the infant 6th root race, Yet all of these events happen within naturally occurring cycles. The elevation and subsidence of continents is always in progress. The whole coast of South America has been raised up 10 to 15 feet. The British Islands have been 4 times sunk beneath the ocean, and subsequently raised again and peopled. Within the last 5,000 or 6,000 years, the shores of Sweden, Denmark, and Norway have risen from 200 to 600 feet. In Scotland, there are raised beaches with outlying stacks and skerries surmounting the shore, now eroded by waves. The north of Europe is still rising from the sea, and South America presents the phenomenon of raised beaches of over 1,000 miles in length, now at a height varying from 100 to 1,300 feet above sea level.
Forms, whether they are land masses or humans, come and go. But the consciousness remains and moves forward. It is the soul's evolution toward liberation that is the most important factor, whether it be individual, group, racial, national, or global. The 6th root race is where the intuition will be developed and will express itself through the qualities of the heart and right human relationships. Humanity will reclaim knowledge of some of the lost Atlantean technologies, create new forms of music and art, as well as gain an understanding of the nature of the soul, reincarnation, and its true place in history. The Aquarian cycle will be an age of science, exoteric and esoteric, where the universal spiritual laws will come into a much closer alignment with our earthly laws, and a period of peace could well reign in the new Satya Yuga, or Golden Age. The 6th subrace represents a synthesis of all Western and Eastern races, particularly in the USA. Note in the triangle diagram that one common denominator is the energy of the 2nd ray of love wisdom as the soul ray of Britain and the USA and the personality ray of Brazil. In the coming race, it will not only be the intuition or Buddhic consciousness that will be the evolutionary goal, but the expression of the loving heart. The nature of the soul is relationship, and the challenge for humanity is to demonstrate right human relations. It is one of the keys of the imminent Aquarian cycle.
So again, just to restate, the reason for this Hidden History of Humanity project is to recalibrate chronology, to recalibrate world history, to reset the correct chronology for the unfoldment of human consciousness throughout the root races and into the present day and into the future, and to really know the story of the human soul, the unfoldment of consciousness from that individualization period back in Lemurian times through the Atlantean root races and all the karma and that was created and is being worked out today. This can only be an empowering factor for humanity to help guide it into the new 6th root race which is emerging.
As stated in the beginning of this documentary, this first series of the Hidden History of Humanity is meant to establish a broad structure of understanding. A future series will follow and fill in more detail. In the meantime, the viewer can visit the author's website or obtain various publications such as the The Hidden History of Humanity, Volume 1, or The Shambhala Impacts.
The possibility of discovering and understanding the origin of the human soul and its divine pedigree is imminent in our time. We stand before a doorway leading to planetary illumination upon the greatest mysteries of life, the hidden history of humanity.